September 21st, 1944, Hereford, Texas. The sky stretched endlessly over flat, dry land. Dust clung to boots. Somewhere nearby, a radio crackled swing music through the warm air. The scent of horses, hay, and roasted meat drifted across the wind. Lieutenant Franz Müller, former Waffen-SS officer, shaded his eyes and muttered, "They call this a prison camp? Looks more like a county fair." He smirked, watching a group of American guards in cowboy hats laugh as they unloaded crates of Coca-Cola. "Let them entertain us," he said to another prisoner. "Americans are soft. They win with factories, not with spirit." But what Müller didn't know was that this strange land of cowboys would soon make him question everything he thought he knew about war and about defeat. June 1944, Normandy. The wheat fields were scorched black. Trees stood like skeletons. Tanks crawled through the smoke like metal animals, jaws open, hungry. But Franz Müller felt calm. He adjusted his peaked cap, wiped a smear of mud from his uniform, and lit a cigarette. Around him were boys, 17, maybe 18, faces still soft, but eyes already hardened. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend didn't flinch. They had been raised for this. These weren't conscripts. They weren't even soldiers in the traditional sense. They were the product of a new kind of nation, one built on purity, precision, and belief. They had memorized every word of Mein Kampf before they ever held a rifle. Franz had been a schoolteacher once. Now he taught something else: control, silence, resolve. "We are not fighting men," he had told his unit. "We are the spine of Europe." And for a while, it had seemed true. In May, they'd held the Caen line against British armor. In early June, when the Americans landed at Omaha, they laughed. "Let the Cowboys come," one gunner joked. "We'll send them back with suntans and missing legs." Müller hadn't laughed. Not because he disagreed, but because he didn't waste emotion. The Americans were easy to define: spoiled, undisciplined, distracted by jazz and chewing gum. They sent chocolate to battlefields and filmed their own landings. They were more interested in headlines than history. And they were soft. They had no hunger, no myth, no bloodline stretching back through iron and fire. Franz had never met an American. He didn't need to. He'd seen the pictures: soldiers posing with movie star smiles, sleeves rolled, muscles on display, always eating, always relaxed. They had tanks, yes. Planes, yes, but no soul. "America is a temporary noise," one SS colonel had said. "Germany is a sentence written in stone." By July, the maps were turning red with Allied arrows. Still, Müller believed. He believed as he stood over the ruins of a church in Saint-Lô. He believed when he dragged a wounded boy from a burning half-track and whispered, "Hold on, the Reich does not break." He believed even when the sky above Falaise turned black with bombers and the roads ran thick with retreating men and broken wagons. "This is not defeat," he said aloud. "This is adjustment." But in truth, something had changed. The radios were silent more often now. Orders were delayed. Trucks ran on fumes. Horses outnumbered fuel trucks. Maps were outdated. Bridges were down. Rations came late, if at all, and the sky was never theirs. At night, Müller stared at the clouds and listened. There was always the hum. American engines, low, endless, circling. Machines without fatigue. Machines without doubt. He wrote a single word in his notebook: unnatural. On August 21st, near Troon, Everything collapsed. Smoke rolled through the valleys. Canadian armor came from the north, American infantry from the south. The pocket was closing. Trees exploded. Ditches filled with limbs and static. Miller's Panther tank was hit by a shell that turned the gunner to ash. He crawled through hedgerows for hours, pistol in hand, mouth full of dirt. At dawn, he was captured by a Canadian corporal who looked 18. The boy didn't speak. He just pointed his rifle, then offered Franz a canteen. Franz didn't drink. He stared at the maple leaf insignia, then looked past it, toward the west. Days later, in a holding camp near Le Havre, the rumors started. They're sending us to America. We'll be paraded through New York. They'll feed us spam and shoot us for sport. They'll make us work in their mines. Franz said nothing. He stared at the floor, hands folded, waiting. He was still an officer, still a believer. In early September, under heavy guard, he boarded a ship in Liverpool. It reeked of diesel, rust, and anxiety. 600 prisoners stacked in hammocks, faces pale from loss. On deck, the wind tasted like salt and iron. Below, the engines beat like a slow drum. He sat in silence, eyes closed, listening, remembering the way the Reichsmarschall had spoken in Berlin, the way the flags had fluttered in Nuremberg, the way the youth had marched, perfect, clean, eternal. Weeks passed. The Atlantic was gray, endless. Then one morning someone shouted, "Land!" Franz looked up. Not concrete, not smokestacks, but trees, heat, swamp, Louisiana. He stepped off the ship into air that felt like soup. The guards didn't yell. The soldiers looked bored. Somewhere nearby, music played, something with horns and laughter. He said nothing. He boarded a train. It moved west, through fields so flat they hurt the eye, towns with names he couldn't pronounce, billboards advertising toothpaste and radios, neon lights, black and white children waving at the train. No rubble, no guards, no war, just abundance. He stared out the window, then closed his eyes. Let them show off. Let them smile. Let them dance. Steel still wins. He believed it, because if he stopped believing, there would be nothing left. September 1944. Hereford, Texas. The train screeched into a siding under a sky so wide it made the world feel hollow. Dust coated everything. Rail cars, boots, teeth. Heat shimmered above the tracks, like ghosts. Franz Miller stepped off with his hands cuffed and his eyes narrowed. Barbed wire, watchtowers, American flags. But something was wrong. Too quiet. Too open. There were no dogs barking, no guards shouting. Only the steady buzz of insects, the crackle of distant radios, and a faint smell of... Was that beef? He was marched into the camp with 20 others. No one touched him. A sergeant read off names from a clipboard. Another handed him a canvas bag with toiletries, soap, razor, a small towel, a clean undershirt. No beatings, no forced labor, no hunger. They want us soft, he thought. It's psychological. Inside the barracks, the floors were swept. The windows opened to the breeze. In the corner sat a bookshelf, actual books, English novels, a dictionary. The man on the top bunk introduced himself as Oscar, captured in Sicily. They let us play football on Sundays, he said. Sometimes we listen to music. Franz stared at him. Music? Oscar shrugged. Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman. It's not Wagner, but... He trailed off. Miller said nothing. That night, as he lay in bed, the mattress beneath him too soft, the fan above too smooth in its rhythm, he watched a moth bump against the ceiling light again and again. And he thought, this isn't how victors treat enemies. In the morning, something stranger happened. They were lined up outside the mess hall. An American officer stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Gentlemen," he said, "this Saturday, the city of Hereford will host a rodeo. You've been invited as guests. Clean uniforms will be issued." No one spoke. Then someone in the line laughed, a dry, disbelieving sound. "A rodeo? Are they mocking us?" Another prisoner muttered, "It's a trap. Entertainment before interrogation." Franz didn't laugh. He didn't speak. He looked at the officer's face. No malice, no superiority, just routine. Too routine. Later, back in the barracks, he sat at the edge of his bed and rubbed the soap between his fingers. Real soap. American-made, still wrapped in paper. He opened it. The scent was faintly floral, too clean, too strange. And for the first time since his capture, he felt something shift, just slightly, beneath the surface of his certainty. He didn't know it yet. But the real war was about to begin. Inside. September 23rd, 1944, outside Hereford, Texas. The trucks arrived just after noon. Green, dusty, canvas-covered. Not prison transports, civilian cattle trucks. The kind Miller had seen in old Western films, which he'd once mocked as crude American fantasies. Each prisoner was handed a clean khaki shirt, pressed, folded, still warm from ironing. As they boarded, the guards didn't bark. No guns were raised, just a quiet, almost bored. "Stay seated. Enjoy yourselves." The sun glared off the hood of the lead truck. Franz squinted as they rolled out through the camp gates. No fences, no shadows, just flat land and windmills. He glanced at the men beside him. Oscar, the Sicilian captured radio operator, clutched the edge of the bench like it might vanish. A young private beside him whispered a prayer in Bavarian dialect. 20 minutes into the ride, they passed a schoolhouse. Children stood outside, waving. Franz blinked. They weren't mocking. They weren't afraid. One girl ran alongside the truck, grinning, her pigtails bouncing. She held a hand-painted sign. "Welcome, Germans." Someone in the truck cursed under his breath. "This is a trap," a corporal muttered. "Some kind of humiliation ritual." Franz looked straight ahead. He said nothing. They arrived at a dusty arena. Nothing grand. Wooden fences, a makeshift announcer booth, bales of hay. But there were flags, food stands, the smell of chili and roasting corn, and people, hundreds of them, Americans, cowboys in denim and leather, women in dresses and gloves, children holding balloons, old men with medals on their lapels. Franz felt something tighten in his chest. They brought civilians to watch us, but no one stared at them with hate. Some nodded. A man tipped his hat. A woman offered a paper cup of lemonade to one prisoner, who refused it, trembling. They were guided to a shaded section of bleachers, reserved, marked with small paper signs. "Par W seats." A band played something upbeat, brass-heavy, loud, joyful. Then the rodeo began. A man burst from the gate on horseback, chasing a calf. Another roped it mid-run. Applause erupted. A child beside Franz screamed with laughter. He stared. None of it made sense. This is recreation during war? Behind the spectacle, he could hear the announcer's voice over the crackling loudspeaker. "And now, folks, please welcome our special guests today, German prisoners from Camp Hereford." The crowd clapped. Politely, genuinely. A boy no older than 10 turned to Franz and said in broken German, "You like it?" Franz opened his mouth, but no words came. Afterward, The prisoners were given ice-cold Coca-Cola. The bottles glistened with condensation in the sun. He didn't drink, just held it in his hand, watching it sweat, listening to the laughter echo across the arena. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid of a bullet. He was afraid of what it meant that these people smiled so easily, that they gave lemonade to their enemies, that they laughed while half the world was in ruins. That night, back in the barracks, Franz lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan. Are they trying to convert us? Or are they truly this unbothered? He didn't know what scared him more. September 24th, 1944, Camp Hereford. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the heat was already there, waiting. Franz Müller stepped out of the barracks and saw something that made him stop mid-step. A truck. Not military green, but dull white, like ice. On the side, painted in clean black letters, U.S. Army, Cold Storage Division. 2 American privates unloaded it with practiced rhythm. A steel ramp, rolling carts, gloved hands. They were moving crates, metal-lined, marked with a red triangle and bold words. Perishable, keep below 40 degrees. Inside those crates were glass bottles, neatly arranged. Beads of condensation ran down their sides like sweat. Even from a distance, Müller knew what they were. Coca-Cola. He said nothing, just watched. A sergeant walked past him, whistling a jazz tune, clipboard in hand. The bottles were wheeled into a side building marked Storage Unit C. That was where Müller had been assigned for work detail. Inside, the building was impossible. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Fans spun lazily. The walls were lined with chrome shelves and refrigeration units, each one labeled with black stencil letters: rations, hygiene, ice, confection. He passed rows of canned peaches, powdered milk, chewing gum. And then he stopped. A full-length refrigerator door, marked simply, POW, soft drinks, cold. He opened it and froze. Hundreds of Coca-Cola bottles, stacked with surgical precision, nestled in molded rubber, perfectly spaced. Each one cold to the touch. No smudges, no dents. Clean as glass in a cathedral. Next to the bottles was a clipboard. POW consumption log. Weekly allocation, 144 bottles distribution rate, 1 bottle, 3 prisoners, 48 hours. Franz couldn't move. His fingertips brushed the edge of 1 bottle. It bit him with cold. He pulled his hand back. In France, they'd burned supply maps for warmth. In Belgium, he'd watched medics fight over a crust of bread. In Falaise, he drank rainwater from a crater full of ash. And here, in the middle of a desert, his enemy chilled soda for him. Not because they had to, but because they could. That night, he opened his journal, and for the first time, his hand shook. He wrote, "They burn fuel for pleasure, freeze water for taste, deliver ice to their prisoners." Then paused, crossed out prisoners, wrote, "Guests?" He stared at the page, then closed the book, hard. September 26, 1944, Camp Hereford, Texas. Franz Müller had assumed it was a reward. After weeks of latrine duty and gravel hauling, being sent to the supply depot felt civilized. No shouting, no dogs, just a clipboard placed in his hand. Verify inventory. Sign when finished. Inside, the air was cool. Industrial fans spun overhead. The floor was clean, almost polished. Stacks of labeled crates stretched along the walls. Franz flipped through the manifest. Weekly delivery. Compound 4, Pasha W use only. Coca-Cola, glass bottles, 10,080 units. Butter, grade A, 312 pounds. Fresh eggs, 1 hours 80 dozen. Ice blocks, 720 pounds. Fuel burned, Transport and refrigeration. 1,760 gallons, a red stamp at the bottom. Cold chain must remain uninterrupted. Geneva compliance required. He reread the number. 1,460 gallons of fuel. For prisoners. He blinked. In Normandy, they had abandoned armored vehicles for lack of half that. Here, the Americans chilled soda for captives. He walked over and touched one of the crates. The glass bottle was sweating, cold. He remembered the fuel shortages in the French hedgerows. Whole units grinding to a halt for a few dozen gallons. Men pushed trucks by hand. Commanders rationed heat. No one drank anything cold, not even water. But here, cold was policy. Cold was protocol. Cold was protected by law. And somehow, cold was morale. The pen hesitated slightly as he signed. That afternoon, he wandered into the camp library. He wasn't looking for anything, just moving, just thinking. The room was empty. Dust floated under a hanging bulb. A faint radio played swing jazz in another room. He reached for a technical manual. A newspaper slipped out and landed at his feet. Stars and Stripes. August 1944. Red Ball Express moves 12,500 tons per day. 6,000 trucks run daily from the beaches to the front. Staffed primarily by African American drivers. Cargo includes food, munitions, medical kits, and Coca-Cola. 1.2 million gallons of fuel burned every day. He turned the page. A photo. Crates of Coca-Cola next to artillery. A medic sat on one, drinking from the bottle. Caption. Morale. Delivered hourly. Franz folded the paper. Slowly. Precisely. That night, he lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. The generator hummed. The ice machine clicked on behind the kitchens. He didn't write, didn't speak, didn't move. Only one thought surfaced. If they can fight a war like this, then we were never meant to win. September 26th, 1944. Camp Hereford, Texas. Franz Müller didn't understand why he'd been reassigned. After weeks of physical labor, he found himself walking into a cool, quiet warehouse. The door clicked shut behind him. No guards, no orders barked. Just a clipboard handed to him by a man in uniform who barely looked up. Inventory. Sign when you're done. Franz stepped between shelves lined with crates. Fans overhead kept the air moving. Everything was labeled, stacked, ordered. He flipped open the manifest. Coca-Cola, 10,080 bottles. Butter, 312 pounds. Eggs, 1,080 dozen. Ice, 720 pounds. Fuel consumed for transport and refrigeration, 1 hour 60 gallons. A red stamp across the bottom read, Cold chain must remain uninterrupted. Geneva compliance required. He blinked, then read it again. 1,460 gallons to keep soda cold for prisoners. He touched one of the crates. The glass bottle inside was damp, cold, smooth. In Normandy, they abandoned trucks over less fuel than that. He remembered a lieutenant crying as he burned maps for warmth. Now here he stood, surrounded by luxury, chilled with military precision. He signed the manifest slowly, as if each letter carried weight. That afternoon, he walked into the library. The air smelled of glue and old paper. A record played faintly in another room. He wasn't looking for anything. A newspaper slipped out from between two books and landed at his feet. Stars and Stripes. August 1944. The headline read, Red Ball Express moves 12,500 tons per day. He read, 6,000 trucks running without pause, driven mostly by black soldiers, hauling ammunition, food, medical kits, and Coca-Cola. 1.2 million gallons of fuel burned daily. Every soldier gets one bottle, no matter where he is. He turned the page. There was a photo. Coca-Cola stacked beside artillery. Soldiers resting. One man drinking. The caption, Morale. delivered hourly. Franz folded the paper with care. That night, he lay on his cot. The fan turned. The generator hummed. The ice machine clicked somewhere behind the kitchen. He didn't write, didn't speak, didn't sleep. He listened to the rhythm of machines that never stopped. He thought of the fuel, the crates, the cold. And then he thought of his own army, of everything they thought they understood. If they can fight a war like this, then we were never meant to win. October 1st, 1944, Camp Hereford, Texas. The morning was still. Sky like stretched linen. No trucks, no drills. Only the sound of boots on gravel as Franz walked alone toward the admin building. A paper had arrived for him. That's what they said. Inside he was handed a folder, thin, labeled in English. He didn't ask questions. He carried it back to Barracks 8 and sat at his bunk, turning the pages with steady hands. It was a translation of a German officer's testimony, taken weeks earlier in a POW camp in Illinois. The name hit him like a hammer. Colonel Dieter Mohnfeld, former SS Logistics Command, his old superior. The first line read, "We were defeated before the war began." Franz kept reading. We believed in efficiency, in control, in fear, but none of that compares to abundance. He flipped the page. I watched trains carry food to the front, but they ran late, ran empty, ran sabotaged. The Americans? They built a highway for soda. I watched their convoys from my cell, never stopping, always full. You cannot defeat that. Franz set the folder down. Outside, a truck backfired. He didn't flinch. Later that afternoon, he was assigned to another work detail, cleaning out a storage shed behind the camp chapel. Inside were boxes of books, posters, letters. Some English, some German. One envelope was marked, "Return to sender." It hadn't been opened. Inside was a photograph. A U.S. soldier with a woman and a child, smiling, standing in front of a factory. On the back, a note in cursive. We're producing 80 trucks a day now. Jimmy got promoted. Tell Oscar we'll send him a Coke if the weather holds. Franz sat down on the wooden floor. The shed smelled of mold and dust. He didn't move for almost an hour. That night, Oscar was writing again. A full notebook, filling page after page with sketches, notes, names. He was planning something. What? Franz didn't know. He looked at the drawing under his mattress. The Texas sky. The pencil lines had started to fade. The next morning, they were taken to a local grain mill for repairs. The foreman greeted them with a joke. They laughed, not because it was funny, but because no one expected them to. At lunch, a man from town handed Franz an apple. Just handed it to him. No explanation, no stare, no fear. On the ride back, Oscar leaned in. They think we're going to go home one day. Franz didn't answer. That night, he opened the folder again. Read the last line of the colonel's statement. We built a war on precision. They built theirs on scale. And you can't outrun what never runs out. He thought of the lectures they had received in Berlin. Charts, calculations, assumptions. They expected waste, slowness, laziness. But the truth was colder. The American machine did not run on fear or ideology. It ran on trucks, on sugar, on steel, on infinite motion. And worst of all, it worked. Because it didn't care who believed in it, only that it delivered on time. He remembered how they had studied enemy logistics in Berlin. Diagrams, maps, theories about supply and morale. None of them had accounted for Coca-Cola on ice, or highways built not for tanks, but for candy bars and spare parts. None of them predicted that the American war machine would care more about comfort than fear, and somehow win because of it. He closed the folder. In the darkness, he whispered, "Maybe we never understood what we were fighting against." He thought of a phrase he once heard in an officer's briefing. Shock and awe. Back then, it sounded like noise, an American slogan. But now he understood. This wasn't just a military campaign, it was a psychological one. And it worked, not by terror, but by sheer, unstoppable normalcy. October 10, 1944, Camp Hereford, Texas. A new shipment arrived that morning. Not food, not fuel, books, stacks of them, hundreds. Crates marked Library Expansion Initiative, U.S. Army Education Corps. Every title cataloged, every genre represented. History, agriculture, mechanical engineering, English grammar, American literature. Franz helped unload them. No guards watched. No one checked his hands for weapons. He could have slipped a blade between the pages. No one cared. That kind of war had already ended. Later, at the camp library, they started sorting. The Dewey Decimal System, Oscar had memorized it in 3 days. One book caught Franz's eye, a hardback, faded red cover, the United States War Production Board, Annual Report, 1943. He opened it. First page, a single sentence. America produced more material in 1943 than the Axis did from 1939 to 1942 combined. He read on, 98,000 aircraft, 24,000 tanks, 8 million tons of shipping, 1.5 million trucks, 200,000 artillery pieces, millions of rifles, billions of bullets. One chart showed tank production by month. Another compared shipyard outputs. In every graph, America's line curved upward, relentless, monstrous, elegant. At the bottom of one page, a quiet note. Current munitions output exceeds every previous war in U.S. history, combined. He closed the book. That afternoon, he asked to visit the projection room. They said yes. The film was about American factories, narrated in a flat, calm voice. Lines of women assembling bomb sites, children collecting scrap metal, elderly men oiling machinery, everyone working, everyone building. He recognized a factory from the photo in the envelope. Then another shot, crates of Coca-Cola lifted into a military transport plane. Another, Ford's Willow Run plant, producing a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. Every 63 minutes. That evening, he wrote something for the first time in weeks. 3 words. They never stopped. They never stopped. The numbers weren't just impressive. They were impossible. No one in Berlin had believed them. They thought Allied propaganda exaggerated. They thought America was soft, lazy, divided by race, distracted by music and movies. But the charts said otherwise. The charts didn't lie. The charts showed victory printed in ink and steel and smoke before the battlefield ever mattered. It wasn't just about output. It was how casually it all seemed to happen. Entire cities retooled in weeks. Schools converted to assembly halls. Civilians mobilized without slogans or flags. It wasn't ideology that drove them. It was function, efficiency, will. October 17th, 1944. Camp Hereford, Texas. There was a rumor going around. Something about a magazine. A real American magazine. Franz found it tucked behind a stack of manuals in the library. No stamp, no censorship. Just paper that smelled of fresh ink and a world beyond the barbed wire. Life magazine. October issue. He turned the pages slowly. The photographs were sharp, alive. They felt nothing like the grainy black and white pages of German bulletins. A 2-page spread stopped him cold. Aircraft carriers, dozens of them, stretched across the horizon in the Pacific, steel decks glinting under a pale dawn. The caption said, "By December, the United States will have more carriers than the rest of the world combined." More carriers than everyone else. The text continued, "Over 120 carriers, from fleet to escort class, will be commissioned by year's end." He turned the page again. A feature on the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. 60,000 workers employed at the Wichita plant alone, the article read. Each bomber costs $620,000 and takes 9 days to complete. 9 days. For an aircraft larger than anything Germany had ever built. He flipped further. A spread showed children collecting scrap metal, women assembling bomb sites, baseball players training in uniform. One page showed classrooms full of students learning Japanese. Another, German prisoners studying American civics. At the bottom, a quote from General Marshall. "This war will be won not just by soldiers, but by the total mobilization of society." Franz read the entire issue. Every headline, every advertisement, even the cigarette slogans. When he closed the magazine, he didn't move. He sat there in silence for a long time before returning to the barracks. That night, he opened his journal for the first time in weeks. "They have more than weapons," he wrote. "They have momentum. They have belief." It wasn't just the numbers that unsettled him. It was how seamlessly everything worked together. Children, actors, teachers, each had a part to play. Factories and farms shifted overnight. Cities transformed into engines. And none of it seemed forced. Germany had ruled with fear, with orders barked and obedience demanded. America built with cooperation, with persuasion, with confidence so deep it no longer needed to shout. That, Franz realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. It was no longer a war fought by armies alone. It was a war fought by entire nations, and one side had already decided it would never stop moving. And against that, he thought, no soldier, no flag, could truly stand. October 23, 1944, Camp Hereford, Texas. The envelope arrived after breakfast. Red Cross, folded once. Franz held it like it might vanish. He didn't open it right away. He walked back to the barracks, sat on his bunk, and stared at the handwriting. Then slowly, he unfolded the paper. Wilhelm Müller, KIA near Aachen, October 6th, artillery. No remains recovered. No condolences, no signature, just a sentence. He folded it again, slid it under his mattress, and didn't speak for the rest of the day. That night, the barracks were silent. The wind pressed against the thin wood walls. The smell of dust and wool lingered. He stared at the ceiling, eyes open until dawn. Wilhelm, his younger brother, all noise and mischief, a mechanic, a dreamer, a believer, gone. The next morning, Franz asked for rail duty. He wanted to move, to lift, to sweat. The train that came in was packed with crates, butter, soap, flour, canned milk, and at the very back, fresh oranges. Each crate stamped, packed October 20th, delivered October 22nd. Franz picked one up. It was cold. Wilhelm died with an empty stomach and frozen feet. Here, in Texas, Franz held a perfect orange. He closed his eyes and smelled the rind. That night, he visited the camp library, asked for a government report, something real. They handed him America at War, Industrial Mobilization, 1944. He read in silence. Steel, U.S., 89 million tons. Germany, 18 million aircraft, U.S., 96,000 in 1944. Germany, plus. Japan, 55,000 combined tanks, 88,000 trucks, 2.4 million Liberty ships, 2,010. In 3 years, fuel use, 20 million gallons a sheer day bullet production, 6 million rounds daily. one Jeep every 2.5 minutes. Then, a quote at the bottom, they dropped leaflets, chewing gum, and Coca-Cola. I had bayonets. Ingenieur Hans Kreuger. Franz closed the book. The numbers weren't numbers anymore. They were declarations. The next day, he watched a group of schoolchildren walk past the fence. Clean clothes, laughter. One boy wore a cowboy hat. They didn't look like a country at war. Oscar was sketching again in the barracks. This time, not tanks, not guns, a girl welding, a farmer, a boy holding a wrench, a warehouse filled with peaches. Franz sat beside him. I got the letter, he said. Oscar nodded. I figured. Franz opened his journal. We believed in will, in sacrifice, in fear, but we lost to oranges, to steel, to shipping crates. They didn't just outgun us. They outproduced us, outpaced us, outlasted our story. He flipped the page. They built more planes than we could shoot down, dropped more bombs than we could bury, made more trucks than we had soldiers. They paved the sky with factories. He added, and they never ran out. In Berlin, they shouted about destiny. Here, they whispered numbers and delivered them. Franz remembered a lecture from officer school. The American is soft. He fights for comfort. He cannot endure. But it wasn't comfort that built a bomber every hour, or shipped oranges across a continent in 2 days. It was something else. Discipline, yes, but not blind. Belief, yes, but not in flags. In motion, in systems, in people. He looked down at his hands, browned by sun, toughened by labor, different now. Then he drew something in his notebook, a highway stretching into the horizon, trucks, radios, medical tents, no flags, no speeches, just direction. Underneath, he wrote, they never stopped. That, he realized, was why they had already won. In the Reich, everything was command. Slogans painted on walls, posters of heroes. But here, it was rhythm, production lines, schedules. Franz realized something terrifying. They didn't need speeches. They didn't need fear. They just worked, and it worked. Every crate, every truck, every screw had a destination. December 8th, 1944, Camp Hereford, Texas. The weather turned cold, but not like Europe, not cruel, just quiet. Franz stood near the gate as the last transport truck rolled out. Inside, some prisoners waved, others didn't. Most just looked forward. He wasn't on the list, not yet. Behind him, the American flag flapped lazily in the morning wind. He didn't hate it anymore. That week, the camp showed a newsreel, footage from Normandy, from Paris, from inside Germany. Even POWs were allowed to watch. It was grainy, loud, impossible to forget. Burned towns, frozen soldiers, train tracks leading into silence. Then one word filled the screen, Auschwitz. Some laughed, others looked away. Franz sat still. He didn't move when the lights came back on. Later, he wrote in his journal, they were right to fear us, but they were stronger to forgive us. He paused, then crossed out forgive, and wrote endure. We brought fire. They brought factories. We brought chains. They brought chocolate. They won the war, but they didn't lose themselves to win it. Oscar gave him a final sketch before being transferred east. It showed a POW holding a hammer, building, not marching. Behind him, rows of machines, but in the far corner, a sapling breaking through the concrete. Franz looked at it for a long time, then folded it carefully and slipped it between the pages of his journal. That night, he sat under the stars and listened. No speeches. No orders, just wind over wire, and the soft rhythm of a country that had chosen to build. The war, for him, was over, but the memory, the truth, was just beginning. Before bed, Franz flipped through the notebook he had filled since July. It wasn't military notes anymore. It was drawings, reflections, lists of numbers and smells. A page about the orange, another about a girl welding, one titled simply, "They Never Stopped." He had stopped counting the days, not out of despair, but out of clarity. Every sunrise now felt less like punishment and more like pause, an intermission between what had been and what might still be possible.